Quebec announced it will be jailing inmates according to their anatomical sex instead of an inmate's preferred gender identity.
Reports of Iranian officials seeking refuge in Canada sparks outrage and calls for deportations.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced new retaliatory tariffs against American steel. Hello Canada, it's Friday, June 20th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Clayton, DeMaine.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Quebec will now house transgender inmates in provincial jails according to their anatomical sex under a new directive the province says is meant to improve safety and fairness in detention facilities. Public Security Minister François Bonnardel announced on Wednesday that the change will apply across all provincial correctional institutions. Bonnardel said, quote, "With this new orientation, the Quebec government is ensuring equity in the treatment of all inmates in Quebec. Safety must always come first for the benefit of correctional officers, our fellow citizens, and incarcerated people. Under the previous policy, transgender inmates could request placement in a facility matching their gender identity. The government says this allowed for requests by inmates who had not undergone total gender surgery and created complications for inmate safety and reintegration. The change follows Mohammed al-Balouz being sentenced to life in prison in 2023 with no chance of parole for 25 years after murdering his wife and 2 children. The mother was stabbed 23 times in the incident. He subsequently began identifying as a woman and was held at a women's detention center before eventually being transferred to a men's prison. According to the government, the new approach will still include case-by-case evaluations upon intake to determine how best to ensure the safety of all inmates. The province said that despite the stricter placement criteria, accommodations will still be made for transgender inmates where appropriate. Quebec's Minister of Public Security added that transgender inmates were previously sometimes isolated from the general population in their living area and during social reintegration programs and services. According to the ministry, correctional officers will be provided training and best practice guides to inform them about sexual and gender diversity and LGBTQ rights. Quebec's correctional system houses individuals awaiting trial or serving sentences under 2 years. Longer sentences fall under federal jurisdiction. As of June 13th, there were 6 self-identified transgender inmates in provincial custody, representing about 0.1% of the inmate population. Federal correctional policy still allows for inmate placement based on gender identity, not anatomical sex. Quebec's new rules apply only to provincial jails under its jurisdiction. There are several women's groups in Canada that have been outspoken against the presence of biological males who claim to be transgender women being allowed into women's prisons. And this is happening at the federal level as well. It's not just the provincial level. The federal government is in charge of prisons across the country, and there are several inmates who are currently housed in men's prisons at that level. But this seems to be a positive step, at least for Quebec. Is this going to satisfy women who are concerned about this issue? And is it a step in the right direction that might translate other provinces following suit or the federal government doing so?
Yeah, Cosmin. So this move is absolutely going to be viewed by many of those women's rights advocates who are opposed to trans-identifying males in female prisons as a step in the right direction, though obviously it's not entirely what a lot of those activists are wanting. Simply having breasts from hormone therapy, for example, will not be enough to be considered an anatomical sex as according to this law. So I'm sure this will satisfy a lot of activists as a key argument against males in female prisons is that they still have male genitals and are more likely and capable of, sexually abusing other inmates. But that isn't the only reason people take issue with transgender males entering women's jails. Another point that is often brought up is the likelihood for male inmates to be violent and the higher likelihood that males are violent in general, and the average strength differences between people who went through male puberty and those who haven't. This new law is a sure way to curb those concerns of people who are worried that some individuals lie about their gender identity to have a safer environment in prison, only to victimize other inmates. I'd wager most males who are simply pretending to believe they are women are likely not going to want to remove their genitals for the ruse. Israeli media reports alleging that senior Iranian regime officials are attempting to seek asylum in Canada in the wake of Israeli military strikes have ignited a storm of criticism, sparking calls for deportations from conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Laura Sellier, the host of Middle East Now on I-24 News English, announced Tuesday that top Iranian officials were reportedly fleeing Iran and seeking asylum in Canada as Israel carries out offensive strikes. Casey Babb, a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, suggested senior Iranian officials may be attempting to do so as, quote, their former colleagues have already made it to Canada. Former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus echoed Babb's analysis and alleged that Canada has become, quote, maybe one of the worst places in the West for Jews, and that Canada has, quote, no political will to actually defend itself. Poilievre called for their immediate deportations on X, saying, quote, thugs from the Iranian regime hiding in Canada must be deported, and we must stop any more from entering our country now that they are fleeing defeat in the Middle East. As True North reported in January, Iranian Canadians have been sounding the alarm about Canada giving safe haven to regime officials. Salman Sima, a survivor of torture and a staunch advocate for a free Iran, told True North that hundreds of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps members have been reported in Canada, re-traumatizing many members of Iran's refugee diaspora. He said that the Canadian government needs to do more to ensure human rights violators and dictatorship officials do not have a haven in Canada. Sima added that Canadians who side with the Islamic regime and protest Israel's attack on Iranian officials are no friends of the Iranian people. As reported by True North, the PS 752 flight shot down over Tehran in 2020 killed 176, including 85 Canadian citizens and permanent residents. Rebecca Purdy, a senior spokesperson for the Canada Border Services Agency, told True North that several factors affect the ability to remove a person from Canada, which stand in the way of immediate deportations, including subsequent applications an individual can make, such as the pre-removal risk assessment applications. She said that, quote, most of the data the agency has on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Islamic regime asylum claims comes from data reported as of June 6, 2025, before Israel began bombing Iran. According to the report, the agency had reviewed 17,800 applicants for potential inadmissibility in connection with the Iranian regime. As of that date, 20 senior officials of the Islamic regime in Iran have been found inadmissible to Canada by the CBSA. The CBSA further explained that 19 senior officials were already in Canada, with one having been deported so far and another being denied entry. So, Cosmin, there's a lot of talk online about the Iranian-Israeli conflict and what that means in terms of national defense and security concerns for the Western world at large. How much of a security threat is Iran and their pro-regime expatriates to Canada?
Well, it's a national security threat from many perspectives, including intelligence gathering. We know that there are Islamic regime officials already in Canada. They have family members in Canada, and they have associates within Canada, and who knows how much information is being passed on to the Iranian government. And on top of that, the government refuses to enforce its foreign agent registry, which would not solve this problem, but it would at least create a resource where people are required to register when they're acting on behalf of foreign governments. And if there's Iranian agents within Canada, the Canadian public deserves to know that. But the added issue is the fact that it's just such a stain on Canada's reputation. We allow war criminals to roam freely in this country. And this isn't the first time. It might be news right now, but Canada has a history of allowing people who were involved in heinous activities in war in other countries, even in World War II. We know that the Canadian government continues to hide the names of former SS members, particularly those who were involved in the Ukrainian branch of the SS that was associated with Nazi Germany, from the public. They don't want to be culpable for the amount of individuals who made it to Canada and continue to live freely. And it's not just as far back as World War II. There was a story in 2020, an individual by the name of Bill Horace, who was a ex-Liberian warlord accused of massacres and recruiting child soldiers. He was murdered in his home in London, Ontario in June 2020. Now, this individual was allowed to live freely. He wasn't charged for any of the suspected crimes he committed while in Liberia. And there are other cases as well. For example, currently, Hassan Diab, who is a sociology professor at the University of Ottawa, was convicted in absentia in a Paris court of a suspected terrorist attack in the 1980s, where a synagogue was bombed and it killed 4 people. Now, Diab denies being involved in that, but this is the case where we have people who are suspected of committing crimes, terrorism, war crimes in other countries, continuing to live a life as free individuals in Canada. Now, I'm sure the Canadian government is aware of allegations against these people. I mean, they have to be, but they decide to not do anything or investigate further or potentially remove these individuals so that they can face prosecution where these crimes were alleged to have been committed. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a new retaliatory tariff rate for steel imports as Canadian negotiators aim to reach a trade deal with U.S. counterparts in the next 30 days. Carney gave a press conference on Thursday outlining the status of negotiations and announcing the new measures, which are scheduled to be reviewed in 30 days and extended if a deal isn't reached within the month. Carney said, quote, "We will take the time we need to negotiate the best deal for Canada, but no longer. In parallel, we are ensuring the workers and industries are protected from the unjust U.S. tariffs. Canada will adjust or back off from the counter tariffs on July 21st, pending the results." Carney also announced his intention to implement reciprocal procurement rules by June 30th, limiting access to federal procurement of steel and aluminum to only Canadian producers or tariff-free trading partners. The new tariff rate quota of 100% of 2024 levels on imports of steel products from non-free trade agreement partners was also announced. The government will create 2 stakeholder task forces, one for steel and another for aluminum, to convene committees to monitor trade and market trends supporting government decision-making. The final announcement from Carney's press remarks included a $10 billion large enterprise tariff loan facility, which eligible large businesses can use to access liquidity when struggling. When Carney was asked about his goal in the near future, the Prime Minister said, quote, "We need to have ready access to U.S. markets for Canadian companies, not have our hand tied in terms of our dealings with the rest of the world." The American tariffs first came on March 4th after brief delays due to increased attention to border security-related matters, amounting to 25% across the board on Canadian products and 10% on energy and critical minerals. Canada then responded in turn with 25% tariffs on around $30 billion worth of American goods. On the one hand, you had the Carney government essentially exempt a large portion of the retaliatory tariffs, of the goods swept up by the retaliatory tariffs introduced by Canada, by him and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau before him. But now he's introduced this new, or rather he's upped the quota on this new steel tariff, given this 30-day timeline to reach this deal. Now, that was actually announced earlier when he met with Trump at the G7. Trump was questioned how long this deal would take, and they both essentially agreed that it's going to be a 30-day timeline before there's any answers as to what it might look like. So, Clayton, how is this announcement, this new, I guess, increase to the steel tariffs going to affect negotiations with the United States and potentially determine the new trade deal?
Well, other than Carney's tariff hike being vague, not defining how much the counter tariffs will rise beyond the current 25%, the indication that Carney would be willing to back off counter tariffs could indicate to the U.S. that Canada is ready and willing to make a deal, like other countries faced with tariff threats. But dropping those tariffs are conditional, so it's still a signal that Canada is going to retaliate towards Trump's increasing tariffs. But so far, after more than a month in power, we've seen the elbows up prime minister take increasing blows from Trump and not much fighting back. He has, however, increased diplomatic and economic ties with other countries outside of Canada, however, so maybe that'll play a role in the U.S. if they think that Canada can just export to other countries. But the tit for tat, dollar for dollar tariff plan is always going to disproportionately harm Canada, who relies on exporting to the U.S. at a far greater rate than the U.S. economy relies on exports to Canada. Bloc Quebecois leader Francois Blanchet called out Carney just on Wednesday, saying that he's flip-flopped on the counter-tariff issue, just like you were mentioning at the top there, that he's quietly removed these counter-tariffs during the election. And he also criticized Carney for being a candidate who said he was, there for the crisis. The crisis seems to be unsolvable at this point. And Carney said that there was going to be a deal between the two countries by the G7, and we're now past the G7.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.